In a sleek, glass-walled boardroom in Manhattan where success shimmered like the skyline outside, sat James. He was dressed in a modest suit that fit him just right, yet his shoes told a different story. They were scuffed and worn, reflecting the long hours he spent answering phone calls and drafting emails. He often joked that they had seen more boardroom battles than he ever did. As he glanced around the table, his heart raced. He could feel the weight of the room. A group of powerful executives sat before him, all dressed in expensive suits and polished leather shoes. Everyone had their eyes on Rebecca, the company's senior vice president. With her perfectly manicured nails and designer bag, she commanded attention without saying a word. She had an air about her that faded everything else into the background. James had always admired her from afar. She was smart, sharp-witted, and yes, her shoes were the kind people whispered about. As she leaned back in her chair with a slight smirk, he couldn't help but notice her glances towards his shoes. A flicker of judgment mixed with curiosity danced in her eyes. Despite feeling exposed under her gaze, he held onto a thread of hope. Today was a big day, the day they would announce the new chairman. He had worked hard to prove himself, pouring hours into plans and proposals. Others may not have taken him seriously because of his shoes, but he had more than just a pair of worn-out sneakers to offer. As discussions flowed, he engaged with the team, offering suggestions that made the room come alive. His ideas sparked interest. You could see the shift in energy. But as the chatter continued, Rebecca's eyes would occasionally dart down to his shoes. It made him boil inside. How could she focus on footwear when he was laying out an ambitious plan for the company's future? The meeting was drawing to a close, and James took a deep breath as the board voted for the next chairman. He felt every heartbeat like a drum. His hands were sweaty, and bracing himself against the table felt like grounding himself in reality. All in favor of Rebecca becoming the new chairman, raise your hand, called out the board president. Hands shot up around the table. James felt as if the air had been sucked out of the room. She was sharp, but was she truly the right choice? The president's voice cut through the burning silence. A few hands, fewer than he wanted. The room, once electric, felt stifling. James dared to glance at Rebecca again. Her smirk didn't vanish, it grew. The president's voice trailed off, leaving a chilly silence that wrapped around James's heart like a vice. The board members shifted in their seats, some glancing around, unsure of who to support. The weight of judgment hung in the air, a reminder of the reality he'd faced all his life. At that moment, James remembered the countless times he had to fight to be seen as more than what someone wore. He thought about the sacrifices he made to climb the ladder. For years, he had been dismissed by people like Rebecca, those whose shoes had the power to blind. But deep down, there was a fire brewing inside him. He straightened his back, squared his shoulders, and thought of his mother. She had taught him that real worth was never found in polished shoes or grand facades. It was in hard work and authenticity. "I believe in this company," James said, his voice cutting through the tension. A bold statement, but who could hear him past the walls that had been built up? Would they understand? Rebecca's smirk faded slightly, replaced by curiosity, disbelief, and maybe just a pinch of respect. She leaned forward. James's heart raced. He continued, "I may not wear the fanciest shoes, but I wear my experience. I've been battling on the ground day in and day out, and I'm ready to take this company to new heights." For a fleeting moment, the room felt different. The company's future appeared brighter, as if the glittering city outside had shone a light into that dark boardroom. The other members were shifting in their chairs. A spark ignited, and he could see it spreading. One by one, nods began to emerge around the table. People were considering his words, and slowly, hands started to rise. The board president called again, his face turning incredulous as more hands shot into the air. James couldn't help but feel hope swell inside him. Each hand that rose felt like a vote for his authenticity, the real him, not just the man in scuffed shoes. Rebecca's eyes widened. She looked both surprised and impressed. The smirk dissolved completely, replaced with something deeper, maybe recognition. She saw through the surface, right into resilience, and it shifted something inside her. The tension broke, and the president's gavel came down. Shocked murmurs rippled throughout the boardroom. Faces turned to him, astonished, and others began to whisper. Perhaps they were worried about what his chairmanship would mean for their world of polish and prestige. But amidst the chaos, one thing was clear. James and his well-worn shoes had changed the narrative. His heart raced as he caught Rebecca's eye. This time her expression was different. Instead of judgment, there was respect. After the meeting, the air outside felt electric. James stepped into the sunlight, allowing the warmth to wash over him. He had thought of his shoes as a misstep, an obvious flaw, but they showcased that sneakers sometimes could lead to the most extraordinary paths. He spotted Rebecca heading his way. Tension danced in the air between them. "I underestimated you," she stated, her voice steady but kind. James held her gaze, his heart pounding. A smile crept onto her lips, genuine and warm. "Well, then maybe together we can make this company a place where every journey counts." Wow, was she really offering to partner with him? The moment felt surreal, and for the first time he dared to think that he could lead a team with someone so dynamic alongside him. It wasn't just a chance, it was a promise of change. As their conversation continued, James recognized that the journey ahead wouldn't be easy. But if anything, this moment showed him that true worth didn't need to be demonstrated through appearance. What mattered was perseverance, vision, and the ability to lift others along the way. The boardroom, the shoes, and even the smirk everything had transformed. James realized that he had stopped worrying about being judged for what he wore. Instead, he reclaimed his identity, his vision, and stepped forward, unafraid of what would come next. In that moment, as evening lights began to twinkle in the skyline behind them, James felt a sense of purpose fill him. Change was not just on the horizon, it was here, and he was ready to embrace it one step at a time. James stood at the front of the glossy boardroom, his palms sweaty against the cool surface of the table. You could feel the tension in the air like static electricity. The high-ranking executives sat in a semicircle, their faces illuminated by the afternoon sun pouring through the glass walls. All eyes drifted over him, some scrutinizing his tattered shoes. Those shoes. They were far from the polished leather boots his peers wore, shoes that echoed power and prestige. Instead, James's were scuffed, casual sneakers that had seen better days. And there, leaning against the table with a slight smirk, was Rebecca, the company's senior vice president. Her perfectly pressed suit and impeccably styled hair were a stark contrast to his appearance. As she caught his eye, James felt the familiar sting of judgment. That smirk spoke volumes about what she thought. How could someone like him, in shoes like those, possibly be a leader? Yet, as the board readied to discuss the upcoming chairman election, James pushed aside any doubts. He had earned his place at that table, and today he would fight for it. The discussions began with the usual pleasantries, but it quickly became clear that this meeting meant more than just small talk. The tension thickened. James kept his focus, listening carefully to the conversations swirling around the room. Ideas bubbled up, frantic whispers filling the air, but he felt an unnerving silence settle each time he opened his mouth. He cleared his throat. What if we focused on expanding our digital presence? The market is shifting and we need to keep up, he offered, trying to steal some of the spotlight. Heads turned, brimming with skepticism. He could see some exchange worried glances, still caught up in their disbelief that he, wearer of battered sneakers, could possibly contribute anything of value. Rebecca smirked again, leaning back in her chair, arms crossed. The casual pose betrayed her thoughts. How could he even compete with her experience or her flawless presentation? The weight of her disdain felt like a shadow on his shoulders, but he shook it off, refusing to let her still-faced judgment stifle his assertions. If we don't adapt to the changing market, we risk falling behind. Digital platforms are where we need to invest, he pressed on, his voice steadying. A small spark flickered in the boardroom, and James watched as a few members nodded slowly. The silence that followed was deafening. James hesitated but knew he had to take the opportunity. I can put one together, he said quickly. His heart raced as he felt the eyes of the room heavy with doubt and expectation. Rebecca's disbelief echoed in the air as she scoffed audibly, drawing attention to his declaration. Really, James? The smirk returned, a powerful reflection of the status he was up against. He felt the heat rise in his cheeks but stood his ground. Yes, really. I believe I can bring fresh ideas. With every word, he spoke up for all those who had faced the dismissive glares and judgmental smirks, for those who had been underestimated simply because they didn't fit the mold. The board's discussion shifted, and James noticed an ember of curiosity flickering in a few faces. Yet he also caught Rebecca leaning back, her arms crossed so tightly it seemed as though she were gearing up for battle. Let's take a vote, the president said at last, his eyes darting between the two contenders. Hands shot up around the table, most of them without hesitation. A resounding approval filled the air. James's stomach twisted. The result felt preordained, as if the moment had been scripted long before he ever entered the room. The president then turned to the other side. A ripple of uncertainty washed over the room. A few hesitant hands went up, but it was a handful at most, lost against the dominant numbers in Rebecca's favor. He held his breath, his heart pounding louder than the ticking of the clock on the wall. Rejection, he thought. The very fabric of doubt wove tighter around him. Yet rather than sinking into despair, another feeling surfaced: determination. As the vote settled, James felt every gaze weighing heavily on him, searching for defeat. Thank you for your consideration, he said, doing his best to keep his composure. But before he could leave the room, an unexpected voice chimed in. It was David, a junior member of the board who had mostly kept to the sidelines. What if we hear more about James's ideas? The board held its breath. David's words hung in the air like a dare, pulling them deeper into a space of uncertainty. Maybe we should listen. What's been proposed is about the company's future, David continued. We owe it to ourselves to explore every avenue. James's heart soared as he watched the room shift yet again. Uncertainty gave way to consideration. James cleared his throat and gathered his thoughts, leaning in. I can promise that with my dedication, I will work tirelessly to elevate our company's standing. I've been in the trenches, I know the market, what it wants, what it needs. The board leaned in, some even breaking into murmurs, glancing at each other with newfound intrigue. The smirk on Rebecca's face faded as she watched the tide turn. Let's give him a chance, David said, his voice steady. James speaks with passion and we're on the verge of something big. Hands shifted and whispers flurried as he rallied more support. The space felt electric, charged with the excitement of possibility. Rebecca, though still skeptical, was beginning to see him in a different light. As James laid out his vision, he saw hope being stitched into the fabric of that room. He detailed his ideas for a digital overhaul coupled with social responsibility initiatives. Savings could be directed to community projects while investing in technology that connected with the younger demographic. With each point he made, he felt more empowered. He wasn't just a man in worn shoes, he was someone who understood the heartbeat of the company and the world beyond its walls. Soon, the board began asking questions, engaging directly with him. One member inquired. "I have a network of contacts who thrive in digital marketing," James replied. Rebecca couldn't hide the astonishment on her face any longer. The agile way he spoke, his ambition, it was an infectious fire that began to consume the boardroom. After the discussion, the board voted again. This time, the outcome felt as if destiny was at play. As hands rose, James's breath caught in his throat. The feel of anxiety transformed into sheer hope as clear nods began to emerge everywhere. And then he heard it, the president's voice cutting cleanly through the tension. A wave of sound swept through the room, murmurs of disbelief and applause mingled in a beautiful cacophony. James stood there, hardly able to breathe. The reality of it took a moment to sink in. Rebecca looked at him, her eyes now softening. "You surprised us all," she acknowledged, making no effort to hide the genuine respect that had replaced her earlier skepticism. He smiled, a simple gesture that conveyed a myriad of emotions. "I've had to fight for every opportunity, Rebecca." The laughter in the room echoed, not just of relief, but of a shared understanding that something significant had just shifted. In that moment, James realized he had stepped into his role on not just a personal journey, but as someone who would redefine what leadership meant in that boardroom. As evening descended and the sun dipped beneath the skyline, James felt an undeniable thrill rush through him. He was about to lead a transformation. His shoes may have been worn and tattered, but they had carried him to that very moment. Stepping out of the boardroom and into the twilight, he felt lighter than air. Shoes didn't define who you were, it's what you brought to the table that truly mattered. And in that moment, as the city lights flickered on like stars in a new sky, he knew he had finally taken his first step toward greatness. James stood at the front of the opulent boardroom, his heart pounding loudly in his chest. The sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting angular shadows on the polished wood table. Around him, a group of well-dressed executives eyed him critically, their faces betraying nothing. Then there was Rebecca. She leaned back casually in her chair, her designer outfit pristine, her eyebrows raised with skepticism. That same smirk danced on her lips as her gaze dropped to his shoes. Ugly, scuffed sneakers in a room filled with polished leather. The contrast was hard to miss. He could feel the judgment hanging in the air. Despite the years he had spent clawing his way up the ranks, her expression suggested that his shoes defined him more than his capabilities ever could. But today was a turning point, and he wouldn't let her disdain undermine his resolve. "Thank you all for being here," the board president began, flashing an enthusiastic smile that seemed to fill the room with false warmth. James's breath quickened. Today they would vote for a new chairman. He had been preparing for this moment for what felt like a lifetime. His ideas were sharp. The vision he held for the company glimmered with possibility. As discussions kicked off, James listened intently, his mind swirling with visions of innovation and change. He had poured everything into his work, developing a plan that could propel their legacy into the future. But as conversation meandered through the room, he sensed a reluctance to embrace anything different. "We've done well by staying the course," one executive remarked, his hands resting on the table. James's heart sank. Fear of the unknown had always held companies back. "But we're at a crossroads," he interjected, his voice rising with passion. "We must adapt if we're going to thrive." Rebecca rolled her eyes, visibly bored, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Her smile was mocking. It was as if she found amusement in his boldness. In that moment, he knew he had to push harder. "Imagine harnessing technology to connect with consumers, reach new demographics, and establish ourselves as leaders in innovation," he pressed on. Every word felt like a heartbeat. But Rebecca leaned forward, fixing him with a withering look. She challenged, meeting his gaze head-on. "Because I understand the pulse of this company," he replied, affirming his stance. "I know what it's like on the ground." With every word, he felt the spark of possibility breathe life into the room. Some members shifted in their seats, a flicker of curiosity creeping in, yet Rebecca, ever poised, remained unconvinced. "Change for the sake of change isn't a solution," she countered, her tone icy. James exhaled, feeling frustration flare within him. He had seen too many companies collapse under the weight of complacency. "But stagnation leads to failure," he retorted. As the meeting droned on, he fought back against the overwhelming doubts swirling inside him. Here was Rebecca, sharp, cunning, and all the while the flicker of a smile played on her lips. She hadn't just dismissed his shoes, she had dismissed him. Finally, the moment of truth arrived. The board president announced they would hold a vote for the new chairman. With anxiety clawing at him, James felt that familiar rush of heat. It was time to see if his vision could pierce through the skepticism. The president's voice struck through the tension. Hands went up swiftly, almost eagerly. James felt the cold grip of defeat as he watched one hand after another rise in support of Rebecca. The president called out, his voice tinged with surprise, as he had likely assumed Rebecca's victory was a foregone conclusion. James's heart sank as only a few hands hesitantly lifted into the air. A mix of disbelief and disappointment flooded through him. The atmosphere shifted, becoming suffocating. David, a soft-spoken member of the board, suddenly said, breaking through the silence, "Can we not discuss this further? James has put forward some compelling points." The room fell quiet, eyes darting from David to James, then back to Rebecca. The unexpected turn sent a ripple of tension through the group. David continued, his voice steady. James felt hope spark within him once again. He stepped forward, seizing the moment. "I'm not asking for this role lightly. I believe in our company, and I believe we can grow if we embrace change." The board began to engage, asking questions and challenging assumptions. Each time he spoke, confidence surged through him. He was no longer just a man in scuffed shoes. He was embodying everything he'd fought for. "Digital marketing isn't just a trend, it's a fundamental shift," he asserted, his voice gaining energy. "If we don't take a stand, we risk being left behind." Rebecca's expression flickered as he laid out his vision, a plan to integrate not just new technologies but social responsibility into their framework. "Think of it this way, if we invest in community building, we build brand loyalty and trust." The room buzzed as energy flowed between the board members. A few began nodding, their faces betraying the flickers of intrigue. Rebecca's smile faded, the glint in her eyes shifted, and for the first time he saw the doubt clouding her confidence. The board president cleared his throat, the tension in the room had changed palpably. "Let's take another vote," he said, glancing cautiously between James and Rebecca. Hands began rising with a tentative determination. James's heart raced, hope battling against fear. One by one, more hands joined. It felt like a wave of possibility cresting over him, a validation in that room filled with suits and polished shoes. He could see a shift happening not just with the board but with Rebecca. Her fierce exterior had cracked. She examined him differently now, not as an imposter, but as someone who had something to say. The president's voice trailed off in anticipation. James stood there, hardly breathing. Came a sudden cheer from David, breaking the stillness. The murmur of applause erupted, surprising even him. Rebecca clapped, her smirk transformed into a genuine smile. "You did it, James," she said, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "I didn't see it before, but you've got the fire." In that moment, something profound shifted. It wasn't just about shoes or the superficial judgments they drew. It was about recognizing potential and realizing that change could come from anywhere, from anyone. Walking out of that room, James felt lighter than he had in years. His scruffy shoes didn't define him, they were merely a testament to his journey. The path he had walked was laden with obstacles, yet he had emerged victorious, ready for the next challenge. As the easy conversation flowed around him, technologies to consider, plans to chart, James felt a surge of confidence. As if all the years of hard work, the late nights and the sacrifices were finally paying off. He was not just the new chairman, he was a leader ready to reshape the company's future. And behind him, the skyline shimmered as the sun set, casting vibrant hues across the city. The world felt full of promise, innovation awaited, and he was ready to embrace it one confident step at a time. James stood at the front of the sleek, glass-walled boardroom, sweat gathering at the small of his back. Today was the day that could change everything. As he looked around the room, the air felt charged with anticipation, but all he could focus on were the eyes of Rebecca, the senior vice president. She was a force, a whirlwind of confidence and poise, adorned in an immaculate designer suit. But what caught his attention most was that sharp, condescending smirk playing on her lips as her gaze drifted down to his shoes, scuffed sneakers. They contrasted wildly with the polished leather of the shoes worn by everyone else in the room. James felt a rush of insecurity, but he pushed it aside, forcing his heart to steady. Today was about more than shoes. It was about proving that real worth comes from passion and dedication, not just appearances. The board meeting was supposed to focus on the new chairman's election, and James had been working tirelessly, preparing his ideas and strategies to present. "Welcome, everyone," the board president began, breaking the tension. His voice echoed against the glass walls. James's stomach flipped as he suppressed a wave of nerves. He squeezed his hands beneath the table, feeling the heat radiating from the polished wood surface. His palms were slick, his confidence waning as the meeting progressed. The conversation kicked off with the usual pleasantries, but as it shifted toward discussing the candidates for chairman, James felt his chest tighten. "Want to create a strong digital strategy," he interjected, urgency creeping into his voice. "The market is changing and we can't afford to fall behind." Rebecca's smirk returned, appearing almost incredulous. She shot back, her voice icy and composed. It was a challenge, and all eyes turned toward him as if waiting for him to stumble. His heart raced, but he held her gaze. "Because I know what our clients want. I'm on the ground every day, connecting with them and understanding their needs." Yet it felt like he was shouting into a vacuum. A few members murmured amongst themselves, and he could sense the skepticism that lingered in the air. The coldness of Rebecca's expression weighed heavily. "James," she said, cutting through the uncertainty with a dismissive flourish, "change for the sake of change is reckless." Frustration bubbled inside him. He forced himself to breathe, knowing this was his moment to truly make an impact. But if we don't adapt, we risk becoming obsolete. His words stirred something in the room, a flicker of interest emerging from at least a few members, but he needed to push harder. "I propose we reallocate resources towards developing our online presence. If we harness technology to connect with our customers, we'll not only stay ahead but redefine our brand." He took another deep breath, his voice rising with determination. Rebecca regarded him with that ever-persistent smirk, the judgment still etched in her expression. It infuriated him, yet also ignited a fire deep within. "You think just because you're here in your what-are-they-called sneakers that you can disrupt the status quo?" The humiliation bit deep. James clenched his jaw, determined not to falter. "I might not have the fanciest shoes, but I've walked a hard road to get here." The room fell silent for an extended moment. With every word, it felt like the walls were closing in around him, but he refused to back down. He held his ground, trying to showcase more than his appearance, more than her judgments. Soon the board president announced it was time for the vote. James's heart raced painfully in his chest. Hands shot up immediately, a confident wave of support. James felt his hope dwindle. He couldn't hide his disappointment as he counted the hands, feeling as though each one planted a nail in his coffin. The president called out, his voice hesitant. A few hands rose hesitantly, perhaps out of pity rather than belief. It felt like an eternity as he stared at those meager support numbers. Just when he thought he was finished, David, a new member of the board, spoke up. "Wait a minute," he said, looking around. "I think we need to listen to what James has proposed. He brings a valid perspective." The room was stunned into silence. It was a rare moment of vulnerability. David's voice seemed to hang in the air like an unspent charge of electricity. "You see, we often find ourselves caught in our methods," David continued, glancing at Rebecca, who had fallen uncharacteristically quiet. "But to grow, we should discuss every angle." James felt a swell of hope. "Exactly, this isn't about my shoes, it's about vision. My goal is to create a forward-thinking strategy that aligns with the future of our industry," he asserted, working to draw in the doubts that lingered in the room. As conversation resumed, questions began to flow from one board member to another. Someone asked. James leaned forward, seizing the opening. "I have contacts in digital marketing that can provide crucial insight. I'll build a task force dedicated to advancing our brand online," he suggested, speaking more animatedly as excitement infused his words. The board members began nodding, engaging with him. He felt the tide shift, like a ship adjusted to catch favorable winds. Questions were now emanating from all sides, igniting the conversation into a vibrant exchange. Rebecca, however, remained still, her gaze studying him closely, perhaps assessing the smirk she once wore. Each question he answered drew out more gasps of interest from his colleagues. He could feel an undeniable energy filling the room, and with it, the sheer weight of approval began to transform. "Let's take another vote," the president finally said, this time with enthusiasm. Hands rose, one after the other, growing more confident. With each hand raised, the anticipation rippled like waves crashing against a shore. Hope surged in James's chest. The room vibrated with excitement as the board president counted the votes. He paused, the air thick with anticipation. David shouted, breaking the tension like a bolt of lightning. A cheer erupted, a blend of astonishment and approval. Rebecca's eyes widened, her smirk vanished entirely. She clapped sincerely, a gesture of acknowledgement as James stood there, shaking with disbelief. For a brief moment, everything fell silent, the air full of weighty validation. "That was unexpected," she finally said, stepping forward. James smiled, the warmth of achievement radiating through him, replacing the earlier angst. "Thank you, Rebecca. It's not just about shoes, is it?" In that moment of sheer clarity, the narrative shifted. The scuffed sneakers that had once whispered weakness now stood as a testament to his journey. As conversations resumed and laughter erupted around the table, he felt like a new man, like a wave of unyielding momentum began to stir within him. As they left the boardroom, sunlight streamed in again, wrapping around him like an embrace. It wasn't just a personal victory. This was about redefining leadership, embracing transformation, and paving a new path for those who felt overshadowed. James had emerged from the shadows, and as he glanced at the skyline now illuminated under the late afternoon light, he knew that every step forward would resonate, not just for him, but for everyone who would dare to walk their own path, no matter how worn their shoes might be. And as the world unfolded before him, he felt empowered and perfectly ready to step into the future, one bold step at a time. James took a deep breath as he stood in the boardroom, heart racing, palms sweaty against the polished table. Today was a pivotal moment, not just for his career, but for everything he believed in. The room was filled with executives, their polished suits a stark contrast to his scuffed sneakers. A diverse group among them, Rebecca, the senior vice president, stood out like a spotlight. As she casually leaned back in her chair, her lips curled into a smirk. Those eyes, sharp and knowing, zeroed in on his shoes with a hint of disdain. A simple glance, but it sent a wave of self-doubt crashing over him. Her expression seemed to say, he shook his head trying to brush off her judgment. Today was too important. He had spent years climbing this corporate ladder and he knew he had something valuable to offer. This board meeting wouldn't just decide the next chairman, it could reshape the entire company's future. "Let's get started," the board president intoned, his voice echoing off the glass walls. The atmosphere crackled like electricity, tense and uncertain but filled with potential. As conversations began to swirl, James listened intently. His heart raced as they discussed the company's direction. He felt the urgency all around him, the need for innovation. "What we need," he finally interjected, his voice cutting through the chatter, "is a bold digital strategy." Rebecca's smirk returned as she flicked a lock of hair over her shoulder. "Really, James, a digital strategy?" He met her gaze, determination welling inside him. "Yes, it can," he asserted, his voice steady. "We need to connect with our customers in new ways. They expect innovation. We can't continue waiting for change to happen." There was a ripple of interest in the room, yet Rebecca's expression remained skeptical. "That's all well and good, but just because you have ideas doesn't mean you have the experience to lead," she countered, her voice tinged with mockery. The tension spiked. James felt frustration bubbling to the surface. He leaned forward, finding his courage. "I may not have the same experience as you, but I know this company inside and out. I'm on the ground every day, interacting with clients and understanding their needs." The shift in his tone caught the attention of others in the room. Quiet murmurs rippled through the crowd, but Rebecca's dismissal stung. "And your shoes, James." That remark struck him deeper than he wanted to admit. He fought to keep his composure. It felt unfair to judge someone based on appearances. Those shoes had carried him through countless meetings, late nights, and sleepless hours. "I've walked a long road to get here," he replied, chin raised. "My shoes don't define me." In that moment, the tension in the room felt palpable, a taut string ready to snap. He was still outnumbered, and the stakes had never felt higher. "Let's move away from the topic of shoes and focus on the future of the company," he suggested, desperation creeping into his voice. The board president nodded, sensing the energy shifting. James seized his opportunity. "My plan is to reallocate resources toward building a robust online presence. We need to embrace technology, not fear it." His words landed differently this time. As he spoke, he could see some members leaning in, interest igniting as they began to engage. Still, Rebecca remained steadfast, arms crossed. She shot him a look that suggested she was ready to dismiss anything he proposed. She challenged, her tone dripping with skepticism. "I have contacts in digital marketing who can provide key insights," James replied, grasping for the thread of confidence. The tension was shifting in real time now. James could sense the board members waking up to the ideas he presented. After all, he wasn't just selling a dream, he was offering a roadmap. Some began asking follow-up questions, engaging in genuine dialogue. Yet Rebecca maintained her cool demeanor, hovering in that place between skepticism and understanding. With every point James made, she looked a little less confident, a little more confused. "We need this to remain a viable company," James asserted, his voice unwavering. It was clear the room had begun to shift. The murmurs grew louder, encouraging James to continue pushing. They didn't need to just see him, they needed to believe in him. James's heart thundered as he poured every ounce of energy into keeping his composure. Crowds of hands shot up, almost instantaneously, confidence dripping off every finger. James felt his heart drop, but he refused to quit. The president's voice cracked slightly, anticipation grinding the air. A few hands rose. It felt like a timid breeze against a roaring storm. James felt the pressure mounting. A sinking pit formed in his stomach. Had this all been for nothing? And then a voice broke through the tension. It was David, a newer board member who had mostly been quiet. "Hold on," he said. "Can we not discuss these ideas further?" That simple statement changed everything. People turned to look at David, and suddenly the boardroom felt alive again. "Yes, everything I've proposed, I'm passionate about it," James exclaimed, feeling renewed energy surge through him. "The market is changing, and we need to evolve. Let's not lock ourselves into outdated strategies." Interest sparked again, and as discussions resumed, James could feel the tide shifting. Questions came flooding in from various members of the board. Someone asked. James felt electric, each question breathing new life into him. Social media is paramount, it's where engagement happens now. Each of his replies echoed with confidence. He had grown stronger, fueled not just by passion, but by the prospect of having a real impact. Rebecca shifted in her seat, still guarded but appearing a bit more receptive. The shift was palpable, the tide behind him began to swell. It was just a matter of time, but would it all lead to the desired outcome? The president finally spoke up again. "Let's take another vote." This time the hands rose slowly but with determination. A wave swept through the room, each hand creating a rush of hope that felt utterly intoxicating. As the votes continued to accumulate, Rebecca's demeanor shifted from skepticism to genuine curiosity. Then came the moment of truth. The board president's voice trailed off, the tension hanging like an overripe fruit ready to fall. David shouted, unable to contain himself, and the room exploded into applause. The sound was electric, filling the space with an energy that propelled James's spirit skyward. He was shaking as he accepted the claps and cheers, finally allowing himself the relief he had not realized he'd been holding. He glanced at Rebecca, who now wore a look of respect that was previously absent. "Well done," she said, her voice genuine. James smiled, a rush of fulfillment coursing through him. "Thank you, Rebecca." He could sense the shift. The landscape had been altered not just for him, but for everyone in that room. Scuffed sneakers that had once been a source of judgment were now symbols of his struggle and triumph. As the meeting adjourned, James stepped out into the bright sunlight, the city bustling around him. The weight of the day began to lift. He realized he was more than just a man in worn shoes. He was a leader now, and he had the power to steer this company into a bold future. His journey had just begun, a journey that wouldn't be defined by what he wore, but by the vision he carried and the impact he would make. And as he looked out over the bustling streets, with the sunlight catching his eyes, he knew he was ready for every challenge that lay ahead. One step at a time, he would conquer it all, and this time he wouldn't look back. James stepped into the taut silence of the boardroom, feeling the weight of 100 eyes on him. Light streamed in through the glass walls, casting sharp shadows across the polished table. Today was the day everything would change. He could feel it in his gut. They were here to vote for a new chairman, and the stakes had never been higher. But as he looked around the room, he encountered the same disdainful gaze he had faced for years. It was unmistakable. Rebecca, the senior vice president with her immaculate suit and meticulously styled hair, sat confidently with a smirk engraved on her lips. Her eyes flicked down to his shoes-worn sneakers that had seen far more than just board meetings. The difference in their appearances felt like an electric shock. That smirk held so much contempt. It wrapped around him like a tightening noose, making him acutely aware of his place in this room filled with polished professionals. Did they really think his shoes defined his value? Did Rebecca believe they accurately represented his capabilities? James shook off the rising tide of self-doubt. This was his moment to prove them wrong, to prove that his worth could not be measured by mere footwear. His heart raced as he prepared to present his ideas. He wasn't just here to make noise, he was here to make a difference. "Thank you for gathering today," the board president began, his voice echoing off the glass walls. James took a steadying breath, channeling his energy into focus. He leaned forward, ready to jump in. "I believe now is the time for change. The market is shifting." Spotting Rebecca's eye roll, James felt a sting of embarrassment, but he pressed on. "Our traditional methods are failing us." "James," Rebecca interrupted, her voice slicing through his argument, "you think changing our digital presence will magically solve our problems?" The smirk on her face deepened. He felt the room shift, like a pack of wolves turning their gaze upon him. The undercurrent of skepticism met his proposal with silence. It felt painfully isolating, as if he were screaming into a void, yet he remembered the struggles he had faced to reach this point. "I may not have decades of experience like some here," James started, gulping back the frustration rising in his throat, "but I know this company inside out. I work closely with our clients. I see their challenges every day." "Your shoes tell me you don't understand the weight of leadership," she shot back, her tone dripped with condescension. He clenched his jaw, feeling a wave of anger wash over him. How unfair to judge someone based on their appearance, yet he knew he had to keep his cool. "My shoes have walked a long path, Rebecca," he said, his voice steady. "They've supported late nights and early mornings." A flicker of surprise crossed her face, and for a moment the smirk faltered. Had he struck a nerve? The board president cleared his throat. James seized the moment. "I propose we redirect funding toward a comprehensive digital marketing strategy. This is more than just a tech upgrade. It's about understanding the future of our business." A low murmur rippled through the room. Rebecca's eyes narrowed, the smirk returning as she leaned back comfortably in her chair. "And how do you plan to implement this?" James felt a pang of frustration at her dismissal. "Analyze the data. I have connections in the tech industry, and I'm prepared to build a team that will not only adapt but thrive in this environment." The tension in the room was palpable, a taut string about to snap. He watched faces begin to shift, some intrigued, others skeptical. "Fresh ideas can't simply replace experience," came the voice of another board member. James took a steadying breath. "Then let's combine the two. I'm not asking to replace experience, I'm suggesting we adapt with it." The room began to buzz with soft chatter, a sign that at least a few people were considering his ideas. James pressed on. "We can build a loyal community around our brand." Rebecca seemed challenged, her face betraying confusion. This wasn't the stoic response he had expected. Maybe he'd captured a flicker of interest after all. The president announced they would now take a vote for the next chairman. Hands shot up eagerly, asserting certainty, as James felt his heart plummet. A few hands hesitated before raising, trembling slightly in the air lost against the tide. His heart sank deeper, but he refused to back down. He would not allow Rebecca's mockery to define him, and then a spark ignited in the room. "Wait," came a voice from the back. It was David, a younger board member who had largely remained silent up to this point. "I think we should consider James's ideas more seriously." The room buzzed with murmurs, some considering David's words. David continued, his tone brightening. Stagnation is dangerous. James felt adrenaline pumping through him. Exactly, we need to understand that our market is evolving. Heads began to nod as the tide shifted beneath him. The atmosphere lifted as conversation flourished, and it felt like the storm clouds were breaking. Finally, the president spoke again. The excitement in the room became palpable. The hands began to rise slowly, one by one, the momentum shifting to his favor. Hope surged through him as the votes tallied, each hand lifted like a little beacon. He could see Rebecca's expression changing now, the skepticism melting into something more contemplative. The pause felt like an eternity. David shouted, breaking the silence, and the room erupted in cheers. Applause filled the air, echoing against the walls like a powerful anthem. James was stunned, feeling overwhelmed as he took a moment to absorb it all. The cheers, the validation washed over him. It felt surreal. He turned to Rebecca, who now wore a genuine smile. "You did it," she said, her tone devoid of the smirk that had defined their earlier interactions. His heart swelled with pride. "Thank you, Rebecca." In that instant, James understood that the doubts of others could never extinguish the fire within him. That his journey, punctuated by those scuffed shoes, was more than mere appearance. It was a testament to resilience. As they exited the boardroom, sunlight poured over them, illuminating the path ahead. He sensed a new chapter unfolding, one filled with bold choices and daring ideas. The city stretched out before him, alive with possibility, and with every step, James felt lighter. This was his moment, a culmination of hard work and relentless passion. Every step he took, he could feel the strength building within him. Those well-worn sneakers were no longer just a reminder of what he had overcome. They had become symbols of a new beginning. As the world outside pulsed with energy, James looked ahead, ready to embrace all the challenges that awaited him. One bold step at a time, leading with vision, courage, and a heart full of determination. He was ready to redefine what it meant to be a leader. James stood at the entrance of the gleaming boardroom, his heart thumping like a drum. Today was the day, the moment that could redefine everything for him. But as he stepped inside, feeling the cold glare of polished glass walls, his confidence began to waver. 100 eyes were upon him, yet it was Rebecca's gaze that held the weight of 1,000 judgments. She was the epitome of corporate elegance, perfectly tailored suit, designer shoes, and an even more impeccable reputation. But it was the smirk on her face that struck him hardest. Her eyes traveled downward, landing on his worn-out sneakers. James swallowed hard. How could any of them think that shoes defined a person's abilities? Yet he could feel the disdain swirling in the air, as thick as the tension in the room. Was it really so easy for them to write him off, to measure him against superficial standards? As the board president began the meeting, his voice echoed off the sleek surfaces, but all James could think about was the weight of Rebecca's smirk. "They'll never take you seriously," it seemed to whisper. But today he vowed he would show them, he would show her. "Thank you for coming today," the president announced, setting the tone. James felt his heart thump louder. This was it. He had prepared for this moment, tirelessly crafting a vision that he believed would propel the company forward. "I believe we need a transformative approach to connect with our market," he interjected, voice steady but filled with an urgency he couldn't hide. Rebecca leaned back, arms crossed, that smirk still lingering. "Really, James, you think you can just waltz in here and change everything?" Her dismissal hit harder than he expected. His mind raced. How many late nights had he spent analyzing data, listening to clients, and crafting solutions? "I may not have years of seniority like you, Rebecca, but I know the pulse of our clients." The board shifted slightly as uncertainty rippled through the air. Some members glanced at one another, perhaps reconsidering how they perceived him. Rebecca's smirk wavered, replaced with a look of skepticism. "Understanding your clients is one thing," she retorted, "but can you really lead a company?" He felt frustration boiling inside him. It all seemed so unfair. "I believe that if we don't adapt, we will become obsolete," he pressed, the urgency in his voice rising. A silence settled, heavy with tension. The eyes in the room shifted back and forth, looking for reassurance. Was anyone else starting to see the potential in his ideas? James refocused. What if we invested in digital strategies that not only market our products, but build relationships with our customers? For the first time, a few heads nodded hesitantly. James could feel the undercurrents of interest. Yet Rebecca remained unmoved, still propped in her chair with a faint smirk, as if she found amusement in his ambition. "James," she interrupted again, her tone cool, "you can propose all the ideas you want, but at the end of the day, can you really lead?" He took a deep breath, gathering every ounce of determination. Inspiration isn't just about being larger than life, it's about creating a vision everyone can rally behind. There was a flicker of doubt in Rebecca's eyes, a moment of uncertainty that gave him hope. The board president cleared his throat, shifting the conversation forward, but James could see the gears turning in the minds of the executives. An anxiety washed over him as the president raised his hand, calling for the vote. Immediately, hands shot up like flowers opening to the sun. They filled the air with a collective sense of certainty. James felt his heart sink. There had to be a glimmer of hope left. A few hands hesitantly lifted, but it felt like drops in the ocean compared to the wave of support for Rebecca. Dread settled in and he felt himself falter. How could he possibly compete against her unyielding confidence? But as the president prepared to conclude the meeting, David, a junior board member who had been relatively quiet, spoke up. "Wait, I think we should discuss James's proposal further." A surprised murmur rippled through the room. Could this be the opening he needed? Encouraged, James jumped in again. "Exactly, let's not rush into a decision based on appearances." The room crackled with newfound energy and conversations sparked between board members. It felt alive, invigorated by the possibility of change. Rebecca, however, still sat back, her skepticism not yet extinguished. "James," she challenged, "what makes you think you can execute this vision?" He felt the weight of her words but held his ground. "Real experience comes from passion, from being out in the field and seeing what works. I live and breathe this company every day." The room began to shift. More executives leaned in, showing interest in his perspective. "I'm ready to roll up my sleeves," he added. The tension broke. "Let's take another vote," the president said, his tone indicating a shift in the wind. The hands began to rise slowly, almost hesitantly at first, but one after another they joined. His heart raced as the weight of support surged around him. This time it felt different, electric. Rebecca's smirk was still there, but now it seemed less threatening. The board president looked around, clearly taken aback. He paused, building tension like a drum roll before the big reveal. Someone shouted, breaking the moment, and the room erupted in applause and cheers, an ecstatic chorus of disbelief and joy. James was overwhelmed, his legs weakened, and for a moment he felt as if he might float away. He had done it. After years of hard work and countless hours doubted by others, he had pushed through. As he accepted their applause, he caught Rebecca's eye. The smirk was gone, replaced by something different, a glimmer of respect. "Well done," she said with sincerity creeping into her voice. "Thank you, Rebecca," he replied, feeling a rush of validation. The atmosphere shifted, blending laughter and hope. As they exited the boardroom, James felt the weight he had carried for so long begin to lift. The city stretched out before him, alive and vibrant, a world filled with potential he was ready to seize. In that moment, James understood he was not just a man in worn shoes, he was a leader. A voice ready to drive change, to inspire and uplift, not only for himself but for everyone else who felt marginalized or overlooked. Every step he took felt lighter, more certain. Path ahead was uncharted, but he was no longer afraid to walk it. After all, it was the journey that defined him, not the shoes, but the courage within. As he stepped into the bright sunlight, the bustling world ignited with possibility. With every beat of his heart, he knew he was prepared to face whatever challenges came next. Today was merely the beginning of a bold new chapter, a journey painted with resilience, vision, and the unshakable belief that everyone deserves to be seen for who they truly are. And with that conviction, James walked forward, ready to leave an indelible mark on the world, one step at a time. James stood at the entrance of the boardroom, his heart racing. Today was a pivotal moment, not just for his career, but for his self-worth. He took a deep breath and stepped inside, the polished floor reflecting his worn sneakers. As he made his way to the center of the room, he could feel the eyes of his colleagues drilling into him, assessing him, judging him. Among them sat Rebecca, the senior vice president, radiating confidence in her perfectly tailored suit. The smirk on her lips cut deeper than he expected as she glanced down at his shoes. Was it just him, or did that smirk seem to scream, "You don't belong here"? He fought the urge to shrink back, forcing himself to stand tall. Those sneakers had seen countless late nights working hard for the same corporate goals everyone else in the room upheld. But did they care what lay beneath? Probably not. The atmosphere was electric, thick with anticipation as the board president called the meeting to order. "Thank you all for coming," he began, setting a stern yet optimistic tone. "Today we will discuss the future leadership of our company." James's pulse quickened. He had spent sleepless nights preparing for this, crafting a vision he believed would elevate the entire company. Yet as the president began to lay out the details of the candidates, that nagging doubt crept back in. The president asked, extending his arm as hands shot up with barely a moment's hesitation. James's stomach twisted as he counted. Almost everyone had raised their hand. He felt his own resolve waver. With that, a few hands hesitantly lifted, but it barely registered against the tide of support for Rebecca. His breath hitched in his throat, disappointment clawing at him. Rebecca leaned back in her chair, the smirk reappearing as if she could read his thoughts. "Is this really your fight, James?" He took a steadying breath, unwilling to let her taunts consume him. "When it comes to leadership, it's not about appearance, it's about vision and drive," she replied coolly. James's frustration bubbled near the surface. "Inspiration comes from understanding what people need," he argued, glancing at the others. "I spend every day with our clients, hearing their concerns." "Change," Rebecca pressed. He felt a fire ignite within him, a determination sparked by the weight of their accusations. "No, it's about crafting a strategy that resonates with our evolving market." The room fell silent and an uncomfortable tension filled the air. James could almost hear the gears in the minds of his fellow executives turning. Were they reconsidering? "I propose we launch a comprehensive digital marketing initiative," he continued, sensing an opening. Rebecca's smirk faltered slightly, and for the first time he could see some board members shifting in their seats, contemplating his proposal. He pressed on, his voice growing stronger. The president held up his hand. "Let's take a moment to discuss James's proposal." A buzz of conversation erupted, and James felt a flicker of hope ignite. Perhaps this was it, the moment that could shift the conversation in his favor. But just as the internal chatter began to rise, Rebecca interjected, her tone sharp. "With all due respect, we've tried tech initiatives before. James, your enthusiasm is commendable, but it needs to be grounded in reality." The weight of her words felt like a punch to his gut. So many ideas had been left on the table, discarded for the comfort of the familiar. Hadn't they learned anything from the past? It was time for bold choices. "I'm not asking for a gamble, I'm asking for faith in new possibilities." James shot back, determination coursing through him. "We can't afford to stay stagnant." Rebecca's eyes narrowed, but she remained silent, a flicker of unease crossing her face. Had he struck a nerve? It was hard to tell. "Let's take a vote on the candidates," the president said, sensing the tension hanging in the air. The hands shot up immediately. The overwhelming display rattled James, making hope seem so distant. James's heart sank as he counted the hesitantly raised hands, a couple of hands, maybe three, among the majority. With a lump in his throat, he fought against despair. Would he let this be the end, or could he still find a way to break through? The room began buzzing with chatter, and James felt a spark of determination rising within him. David, a junior member, spoke, cutting through the noise. "Can we please take a moment to reconsider James's proposal?" A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. James looked up, hope flickering faintly as others began to nod. Maybe he had allies in this battle after all. "James has a point," David continued. "We need to evolve. Every great company faces these moments of uncertainty." James felt the energy shift in the room, working like an undercurrent to drag him up. He seized the moment. Exactly. "My shoes don't define my ideas, nor my drive." Now the room seemed alive. Conversations sparked, and heads nodded as if they were now pondering the very question he had wanted them to consider all along. Asked one skeptical board member, a hint of curiosity breaking through. "I can bring not just a plan, but the willingness to work tirelessly on it," James replied. "While others might hesitate, I'm ready to lead with action." More questions followed, and James felt himself growing stronger with every answer he provided. He was no longer just fighting for himself. He was expressing a vision they could all partake in. "Here we go," James thought, adrenaline coursing through him as the president called for hands. This time, hands rose with renewed confidence. The applause started softly but quickly built into a powerful acknowledgement that echoed off the walls. James couldn't believe it. As he looked around, he could see excitement in the eyes of his colleagues. The president's voice hung in the air, electric with anticipation. David erupted, breaking the tension. The roar of approval enveloped him like a wave, drowning out all doubt. James's heart soared. They had chosen him. After years of hard work, of fighting through moments when he felt like he didn't belong, the confirmation of their faith surged through him like a lifeline. As the applause rang around him, he met Rebecca's gaze again. This time there was no smirk, just surprise and something that almost resembled respect. "You've done the impossible," she said, her voice tinged with awe. "I've shown that determination and vision can open doors," James replied, feeling the weight of the moment. But even as they celebrated, a seed of doubt crept into his mind. Would they truly support him, or would some continue to undermine his authority? His sneakers that had once seemed like a hindrance now transformed into symbols of his journey, each scuff telling a story of resilience, grit, and defiance against the odds. And just as he imagined the bright future ahead, a dark thought crept in. Had he truly won the battle, or had he merely awakened a formidable opponent in Rebecca, who was surely plotting her next move? As the cheers continued to ring in his ears, James felt the weight of his responsibilities shift onto his shoulders, the enormity of leading this company hitting him like a freight train. What challenges lay ahead? He had gained a foothold, but at what cost? The thrill of victory, while intoxicating, left him standing at the edge of uncertainty. The boardroom, filled with celebrating colleagues, was also a chamber of whispers, where the seeds of doubt could sprout again. Looking out at the skyline through the glass window, he wondered how many people still considered him a threat, a fraud, or simply unworthy of being their chairman. As the echoes of applause faded, one thought pierced through the haze. He would have to be ready not just to steer the ship, but to face the storms that awaited just beyond the horizon. And somewhere in that cacophony of celebration, Rebecca's eyes never left him, a hint of a new plan forming behind her perfectly composed facade. James might have worn the crown today, but the battles were far from over. What lay ahead could change everything, pushing him to the limits in ways he could never expect. The horizon stretched before him, dark clouds swirling ominously in the distance. The true challenge was only just beginning.